319-0319.
The voices have been loud for years, and still they're struggling to make ends meet. We're talking about the province's university students and their concerns over tuition fees, financial aid, and the plight of international students who come here for a broader education but end up struggling with heavy debt. Danielle Sandhu is with the Canadian Federation of Students. She was in our studios recently. Here's a look at that interview. So, financial aid, high tuition fees, it's difficult being a student these days, especially for students that end up staying in school for longer periods of time. So you're a student yourself. What are your concerns? What are the major things that you're worried about?
Well, I think the student experience is affected by so many different things. When we talk about the rising rates of tuition, we talk about a sense of disengagement or disempowerment that students feel within their spaces, debt, the debt that we incur for taking on student loans. But I feel like the quality of education that students are receiving these days, it doesn't map out. It doesn't map out in terms of thinking of, we come here, we pay for our classes, we pay for our courses, and we're not getting, I think, what we paid for.
Immigrant students as well, we know that, if we look at the face of universities these days, the demographic has changed. We have a number of students that are either coming on student visas or their families have moved here and this is now their new home to build a new life. But if now they're coming into a school where they're hoping to get that education so that they can then move on to a higher career and earn a good income, but they're riddled with debt because, whether it's they can't afford it themselves or their families can't afford it. So the immigrant experience as well, what kind of stories are you hearing from them? Because I'm sure it must be extremely frustrating.
Absolutely. I think that financial burden is exacerbated when it comes to immigrant students. We're talking about racialized students who, on average, earn less than their non-racialized counterparts. We're talking about international students, which they pay differential fees, which are up to 5 times as much as domestic students. And that not only does it reflect a sort of difficult financial situation for those students, but it also creates tensions and discontent with those students within their experiences in the classroom or on campus. How do two students feel when you're sitting beside someone who's in the same classroom as yourself with the same professor and you're paying 5 times as much for your tuition? I think that really kind of begs the question of what kind of education are we getting, how does funding work, and it also talks about the unique reality of an international student who's coming to integrate into a new community, a new culture, who's trying to make that social adjustment, and on top of that, they're dealing with that financial burden, which is exacerbated because of their differential fees.
Especially when you have universities wanting to attract more international students to increase the number of university students within that university, work with tuition fees, etc. Why hasn't anything changed? Why are we still at this stage right now when we've been hearing the student voice for a number of years, but we haven't heard any calm in that voice?
So I think that there's a serious lack of commitment. So when we look at this sort of situation, for example, of international students and looking at their differential fees, and the recruitment that happens simultaneously, I know I'm at the University of Toronto, and I know that our president regularly goes out abroad to recruit new students. We have international recruiters. And there's this sort of gap between, recruiting students and then supporting them once they get here. And I think it's important to address that particular issue, and that when we look at the tuition fees that the international students pay, for example, that's used to subsidize the cost of domestic students' education as well. And that speaks to the chronic underfunding of education in this province and in this country overall.
Speaking of the province, we have an election in the fall. We know that you're going to be keeping a very close eye on what the respective candidates are going to be talking about in terms of education. The university focus hasn't been a big enough focus, at least since the last election.
No.
What are you looking for?
We want to see a fundamental commitment to funding. We want to see the cost barriers that exist for so many students to access a post-secondary education in this province or in this country. We want to see those reduced. We want to see those eliminated. And we know that the utmost barrier is cost. So the government can do a lot by investing into education. We have amongst the lowest per-student funding in all of North America in this province. We have, on average, the highest tuition fees in the country here in Ontario. We want to see something change on that front. We need to see a commitment from both the provincial and the federal government in terms of education and ensuring that students have access.
part of that voice, you guys just recently launched another website, educationisaright.ca, and that's, I've been on the site. It's a very powerful looking website. You've got, I think, over 5,000 pictures, testimonials from students. What kind of impact are you hoping to have with that?
I think the first thing is that it gives students an opportunity to share their stories, to share their experiences, to talk a lot about the struggles that they have as working students, as low-income students, as racialized students, to be able to talk about their struggles and being able to pay for school, which is a significant challenge. You're balancing so much. You want to be able to highlight it as an issue, and that's a space for them to advocate for themselves and connect with others, because I think it's all too familiar to feel like you're alone in your own struggle. And if you're able to connect with others who are going through a similar thing, you can put your minds together, you can work on these things together. And I think that's where our lobbying power comes from, is our numbers as students across the province or across the country working together. That's the way that we're going to push to make sure that education and the quality of our education is at the forefront of the next election.
And this whole sense of social media now, because you guys can go on Facebook, you can go on all the websites, Twitter. Do you think that's going to have a bigger impact this time around now?
I think so. I think that politicians are definitely following what's happening on these various forms of social media. I think it's a place where students or young people feel comfortable engaging, and it's something that we need to build into sort of more popular or greater mobilizations as well, and pulling people, because I think showing that we care in greater numbers is what's going to get us the results. So it's using the various media or tools that we have at our disposal to make sure that we're pushing through with our issues.
Okay, well, Danielle, I appreciate you coming in. I know it's been busy. We're going to be keeping an eye on how things are moving on for you, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again soon. Thanks a lot for coming in today.
Thanks so much for having me, Angie.
Coming up in entertainment.